Vatican. It was like, hey, you have one of the guys that's wanted for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln is right there. I think it might have just been, well, we don't think that's him. It was like, no, that's him.
So you're saying it's more of just incompetency rather than a conspiracy?
More or less incompetency. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't pictures weren't being circulated. It's like now, like someone commits a crime, you find out who it is. Their pictures are all over the damn place. Back then, like news traveled slow.
Sure.
So it might have just been a case of that, or it might have been just a case of this guy works like, well, we don't believe that he had anything that was involved in that. It had to been a thing where like we don't believe it, but they keep pressuring him, and they were just like, all right, we'll just fucking arrest him. We'll arrest him, and maybe it was the papacy, their jail sucked, or maybe they're just like, hey, we're gonna go over here and fast and pray, so we'll just leave the door open. Don't you go anywhere. All right.
He said maybe the papacy sucks.
Yeah. I mean,
that's funny.
Maybe they did. Maybe they fucking sucked.
Interesting, Nick. I thought you would be a bit more, what do you want to call it, questioning of this one, but you seem to be siding on the fact that they just were incompetent.
I think they were competent, and also I think this conspiracy goes along because there was back then in a lot of anti-Catholic furor. I mean, it was just a lot of anti-Catholic fear. I think it's just they were just anti-Catholic back then. And yeah, the Catholic Church is not the squeakiest clean of places. Sure. Fucking children. I'm sorry. But back then, I don't see any evidence of it. The only thing that you can point to, really, I mean, yeah, you talk about this Chicory guy or whatever. I'm probably fucking up his name. Who cares? But only other evidence you can point to is John Surratt.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing tying it to it. Yeah,
but sure. even you go back to his trial, the jury deadlocked on the same evidence that got his mother killed.
Right,
but it was literally the same evidence.
But it was what do you want to call it? Not a public trial, not a military tribunal.
Yeah, it wasn't a military tribunal. It was a jury of his peers.
Right.
And maybe, but they still went. I don't know about this one. Yeah. Like this like we don't know about this one. So it's just. I don't. This conspiracy, I feel, is just a bunch of malarkey. It's just a bunch of malarkey.
Fair enough.
Yeah, how do you feel about this conspiracy?
No, I just, I thought it was interesting that anytime the Vatican's name gets pulled into any conspiracy, my ears always perk up. But, other than just like some, like I keep saying, some incompetency or just some bad guards at a jail letting this guy escape, I guess there isn't too much for this one to stand on. So
yeah, that was bad conspiracy. I give it I tell you, I give a little more credence than John Wells Booth surviving, but it's just no. But there was other conspiracies we're not going to get into. There was a conspiracy that maybe his Secretary of War, Edward Stanton, had wanted him killed. Briefly, like he got Stanton, and Stanton was when Stanton first became Secretary of War. I think he was like Lincoln's third Secretary of War. He really didn't like Lincoln because he was kind of not a pro-Southerner, but he was sympathetic to slavery, and but he was pro-Union and hanging around Lincoln. Like he really, at first really couldn't stand Lincoln, and then he gained to respect Lincoln, and then he literally, you ever see someone come from the conservative side to over to the fucking damn near socialist side? And the perfect example would be Edward Stanton, because after Lincoln was assassinated, he fucking took over the government. He was like, hunt these sons of bitches down and shit. And Stanton became a radical Republican. He wanted to punish the not only punish the South, but also give land reforms to freed African American men and women. He was selected to be part of the Supreme Court, but he died before he could take the oath. But there's this conspiracy that he might have try to have Lincoln killed because personal jealousy or whatever. I don't believe that. That's a bunch of crap. There's a conspiracy of some disaffected Northerners that wanted Lincoln dead to stop the war. Some of their reasons for that doesn't make any sense because he had won the war, but he said he cost them a lot of money. That just doesn't go anywhere. Maybe Booth had a couple of Northerners help him out, maybe, but there's no substantial proof. And of course, there's the Lincoln was not assassinated, but kidnapped by aliens, and they put a doppelganger down, and that's who Booth shot. And Lincoln is living amongst the stars, dancing around to that one song. And Lincoln's been doing it for over 100-some years. Yeah, of course, there's that.
Yeah, of course. Always the aliens.
Yeah, always the aliens. But before we end this episode, you want to hear another interesting story of what happened?
Sure.
To Lincoln? Apparently, Lincoln couldn't rest in peace.
Oh.
Yeah, so when Lincoln died, they wanted to return his body back to Springfield and went on this long train ride that went up from Washington to Baltimore to New York to Boston, then back down through all the way to Chicago, and they wanted to take it back to Springfield. And there was the Illinois governor at the time, was selected to confer with the Lincoln family on a burial place, and they had a conference in April 16th, and Mary Lincoln was not receiving visitors, but she preferred Chicago or the empty crypt in the U.S. Capitol that be prepared for George Washington. There is an empty crypt in the basement of the Capitol that was supposed to be for the burial of George Washington, but his family went, no, we're burying him in Mount Vernon.
Oh, wow.
So there's just an empty crypt sitting there. That's a historical. I think the empty crypt holds the Lincoln Cataphract, the stage that was set up in the rotunda of the Capitol to display Lincoln's body. And it's been done for various other presidents who have died and state figures and stuff like that. They still use the Lincoln Cataphract to this day. She finally relented to have her buried in Springfield when her son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was able to sway her to allow a Springfield burial by promising to take Willie Lincoln's body along. His son, Willie, had died while Lincoln was in office, and he was buried in Washington. So they disinterred Willie's body and put it on the train with Lincoln and spread it to Springfield. Springfield wanted a prominent burial location. Location would draw visitors into downtown Springfield. And the plot would be in the center of Springfield on a hill. Mary Lincoln didn't like that. She recalled that Lincoln once said that he wanted a quiet place for his burial at Oak Ridge Cemetery. And on April 28th, Mary sent a message to the Secretary of War, Edward N. Stanton, which she stated the decision was final and that Lincoln's remains must be placed in Oak Ridge Cemetery. She said that it's not negotiable. If they don't put him in Oak Hill, she'll bury him and have her husband's remains taken to Chicago. So they relented, and they buried him in Oak Hill Cemetery. At the end of his funeral procession. So the built this temporary receiving vault for him. They placed him and Willie in it, and the guy couldn't rest in peace because someone tried to steal his goddamn body.
Oh, of course.
So they finally completed the receiving tomb that he was permanently going to be buried in 1874. Lincoln was placed in a white marble sarcophagus in a burial room behind a steel gate locked with a padlock. In November 1876, the Chicago counterfeiter, James Big Jim Canary, planned to steal Lincoln's body and hold it in exchange for a pardon for one of his engravers, who was serving a 10-year sentence in Illinois State Penitentiary, and $200,000. Big Jim was a big time counterfeiter, and counterfeiting was running rapid back there. But the sophistication of the counterfeiting had changed because the Secret Service was on it. But one of the best engravers had worked for Big Jim, and they ended up catching him after he fled pretty much across the country. They ended up catching him and sentenced him to 10 years. So Big Jim was losing a lot of money. So he comes up with this idea that actually someone else came up with a couple of years ago, and Big Jim was like, no, that's fucking morbid and stupid. No, we're not doing that. Someone else wanted to kidnap Lincoln's body and exchange it for money, part of his criminal enterprise. But he was like, oh, I remember that idea. Let's go do that. So the plot failed when two men recruited to assist turned out to be paid government informants. And the men sent to get the body did not plan for how to remove the quarter-ton cedar and lead coffin from the grounds.
Oh, just a small little detail of removing, a couple of ton stones.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they fucked that shit up real bad. And they ended up getting caught. So... And ended up catching them in the act. Like they got like part of the coffin out, and someone like they wanted to like the guy in charge who was a part of the Secret Service wanted to catch him as they were picking up the coffin and taking it out. But one of his agents had dropped their gun and it went off, and they were like, "Oh shit, we gotta get out of here!" And they scampered away. They ended up catching them in Chicago later on in the week. But yeah, you got the president's damn coffin hanging out of there, and the cemetery is about to open. So the custodian, a guy named John Carroll Power, and a group of trusted confidants moved the coffin from his room to a secret location in the basement of the tomb. Finding the ground waterlogged, they temporarily set the coffin on the ground, disguised it under a pile of wood.
Wow.
And moving the coffin proved difficult because it weighed some 400 to 500 pounds, and Powers and the members of the Monument Association were mostly in their 60s. They were relieved to find that the seals in the coffin were intact and that Lincoln's remains had not been disturbed. The following July, Canary and some other members of the conspiracy asked Powell to bury the coffin. He said that the unventilated basement was also impossible to enter in the summer weather, and also moving the heavy coffin had been brutally hard on himself and other aging Monument Association members. Powers, who recently celebrated his 70th birthday, said that he suffered from cramping pains for months afterwards and had no desire to do it again.
Lesson learned.
Yeah, the coffin therefore sat in the basement for another year. Finally, a group of men in their 30s were hired to move the coffin, and on November 18th, 1878, the coffin was moved and reburied in a shallow grave at the far end of the labyrinth of the basement. After receiving anonymous threats in the mail, the coffin was dug up 2 years later to make sure it was still there. In 1880, Powers and associates formed Lincoln Guard of Honor to serve as custodians of Lincoln remains. Other than its members, only Robert Todd Lincoln knew of this organization. And in 1882, when Mary Todd Lincoln died, Robert instructed the Guard of Honor to bury his mother's coffin wherever they kept their father's. Both coffins remained in the basement until 1887, when they were encased in a brick vault, at which time Lincoln's coffin was opened to verify that his remains were still there. So finally, Robert Todd gets sick of this shit.